Hello and a very warm welcome. I'm Geeta Pensay and I'll be your host guiding you through this event. It's so great to have so many of you back with us and to see new faces joining us for the very first time. Now, Public Sector Decarbonisation is in partnership with Liberty Charge and is being delivered to you by Public Sector Executive. The day will be packed full of opportunities to network and acquire current sector knowledge, whether this knowledge is acquired through our experts or event partners in our digital marketplace. I can guarantee you there is lots of opportunity today. Now, we'd like to thank our industry leaders and our experts for sharing their invaluable insights with us throughout the day. The content standard on our PSC 365 platform means that all of the content today is CPD certified. And what that means is that every hour of content that you watch live, you'll earn 1 CPD point. Now, to get your certificate, please email the PSC team at marketing@cognitivepublishing.com. That's marketing@cognitivepublishing.com, and they'll sort it out. Now, alongside the panel discussions on the agenda for you to enjoy, we have some fantastic networking opportunities through our speed networking function. If you're not familiar with it, please do check it out. When you collaborate with colleagues, I'm sure you'll agree that's another great source of education. It also helps to extend the knowledge and connections started today, which can be accessed at any time, ultimately growing our PSC 365 community. And on that note, a reminder about the PSC platform. You and your teams can access a wealth of resources as part of our on-demand content. That's alongside the digital marketplace. We really value your views. And so if you're watching something today and you want to comment on social media, we would love to see what you think. And the hashtag, there's always a hashtag, is PSC-365. That's hashtag PSC-365. Now, let's get going with the focus of today, which couldn't be more timely. The UK government has a net zero strategy in place, yet emissions rose by 4% in 2021. That's compared with 2020, as the economy recovered from the COVID pandemic. Much was discussed and agreed at the last COP. And even though there is a strong determination to get the job done, things are challenging, and there is still speculation that the strategy will fall short of hitting targets by 2050. Now, a review commissioned by Liz Truss in her short premiership found that the UK was in danger of missing out on economic opportunity of the century and suggested a to-do list, such as phasing out new gas boilers 2 years earlier to 2033, setting milestones for onshore wind, and scrapping planning permission for solar panels, whilst increasing solar power generation fivefold by 2035. So lots of ideas there. With much to do and time running out, now is the time for action, as I'm sure you'll all agree. Now, this conference will provide insights, ideas, and we hope solutions from thought leaders in the public sector to help colleagues and peers throughout public sector and provide options and answers to meet those net zero timescales. So let's begin with our first keynote, who I am delighted to introduce. We have Paul Wilson, who is Chief Business Officer, Connected Places Catapult, the UK's innovation accelerator for cities, transport and places. Paul is also Chair of Smart Cities World's Advisory Board and a board member of UK 5G. He's an honorary research fellow at the University of Bristol's Smart Internet Lab. Now, Paul has more than 25 years international leadership experience in sales, marketing, and product management in the B2B technology, media, telecom sector. Paul was a founder of the Bristol is Open Smart City project in 2014, winning various international awards, and went on to be TM Forum's Global Smart City Advisor, co-creating the widely endorsed City as a Platform manifesto. From there, he advised the UK government on the design of its £200 million 5G test beds and trials programme and helped set up UK 5G. Today, he leads an energetic team of people in the UK and globally who work with cities and urban transport hubs, helping to shape their approach to inclusive innovation. So without further ado, let me introduce our keynote speaker, Paul Wilson.
Thank you very much, Geeta. What a generous and warm welcome. And what an important topic this is. There is obviously no bigger topic for us in our generation to get to grips with these issues. And one of the things, as Geeta said, I've worked in technology for a long time, and it's very common in technology to overstate and over believe in the impact that new technology will make in the short term, and very hard to get it right in the long term. And typically the impact in the long term is much greater than people estimate. And as we get into this topic today, as a sort of queen of all subjects, I thought it'd be useful just to give a few minutes of explaining how did we get here? What is the remit that we have in public sector leadership around this topic? And I'm going to talk you through, for the first 3 or 4 minutes, about 7,000 years of history in about 4 minutes. So it's going to be very fast. Hold on to your seats. And then we'll get a little bit into the current day. So I'm not going to give you a big history lecture, although you might think that for the first minute. And then what's coming up, and with some very contemporary and up to the minute thoughts about how can we all engage in this very important topic. Let's get on to the next slide. Every city in the world just about starts with a river, and water is at the core of all of our urban environments. And you can see here a simple dwelling, the oldest known city in the world, Uruk, 7,000 years ago, started on a city, and just about every city has water there. The biggest city in Britain not to be based on a river is Brighton, about 600,000 people today, but it's based on the sea. And you can see how that impacts there. What we know about these environments is that they were very slow. The form of transport was by foot, by horse, by boat. And you can see not a lot happened in terms of transport, which was essential for all of life for about 7 or 8 millennia, where the sailing boat was the fastest form of life. But cities have always been our basic platform business model. And they are the original platform business where people came together to share ideas, goods, beliefs, culture, religion, health, and community. And that's why our cities grow. Now, some point around about 1500, coastal cities take on an ever more important part in the world as we begin to circumnavigate the planet. And it's coastal cities that see the biggest growth all over the world. It was cannons that got put on sailing boats that started the era of 400 years of colonialism and empire from Europe. And many of our biggest cities in Britain follow this pattern of a river, a port, and going abroad. What you see at this time is, of course, there are many horrors that come during this time. But we also see it's a time of discovery, of enlightenment, of science, of the beginning of a global purview of all things as things start to connect up. And of course, we get to an industrial revolution with steamships and railways and coal. And in fact, in Britain, we see the advent of canals with something called the Canal Mania going on 1770 to 1830. Now, why on earth have I started our talk today with this sort of abstract history lesson? Let's go to the next slide. What we see in the next slide is something that's much more familiar to us all. This is the city that many of us grew up in, an industrial city where we have railways and airports and ports and chemical plants and shopping malls, local government. This is the world that we all understand and know. It's only the last 200 years where we have seen this phenomenal growth of our urban environments. And that built infrastructure and new forms of transport go on to have an enormous impact in our current day environment. What we saw happening in this last 200 years was the slums of these environments were slowly improved in the last while. We built enormous roads and suburbs. We built traffic lights. We built sewage. We put gas in houses. We put concrete tower blocks up. We thought about public health. We began to think about domestic appliances, washing machines, and all of this, and just describing the world that we all know. But the point being, it's a very recent development in the grand scale of things. So now if we go on to the next slide, what we see is this is becoming something that we're all concerned about. In the last decade, we've had a financial crisis, our first big biosecurity pandemic globally in the last 100 years. We're worried about our futures rather than optimistic about it. We're concerned about war for the first time in my generation. And we see a lot of ideological shifting around in politics. Why is this happening? We're obviously at the ending of one era and the beginning of another. We are now globally connected with interdependencies that create shocks within the same short period around the world. We're uncomfortable with an economic model that seems to just benefit ever fewer people at the top. We're not comfortable entirely with our housing situation. We don't have enough houses. We're getting air quality problems, cities being sued over air quality. We're experiencing flooding, nature extinction, overheating last summer with fires at a record level, and many problems that we're all familiar with. So what's to do? Let's go on to the next slide. We have a moment where we either have to think about the continuing on the path that we've been on for 200 years of industrialization of cities, or think about how do we transform the way that we do our city management, our urban management, and our management of energy, planning, buildings, built infrastructure, and transport. And of course, that's why we're all here today. Go on to the next slide. What we are very enthusiastically seeing over the last decade is many attempts to transform the existing infrastructure that we have. We look at new forms of energy, particularly in the sea with wind, but also on shore. We look at the development of charging infrastructure for cars and clean air zones. We're optimistic to believe in the use of technology and 5G to create Internet of Things and smart cities that can be used at every level, from waste management to transport management to better culture and experiences. We're looking at the electrification of rail, the electrification of flight, the use of electric drone technology for both transporting goods, people, and other things as well. And we begin to believe in this optimism around technology, or do we? Is technology actually the answer? Let's go to the next slide. The story of all of us. This story that I've told is the story of a 1 million person city, a British 1 million person city. And that today, there are 5 1 million person cities, if you build the slide to the next click. And worldwide, there are 500 1 million person cities. So there are only 5 of that size. But what we see coming is by 2080 or so, certainly the latter half of this century, something like 1,500 cities of that size worldwide. So the story that we're telling here today is the story that we're telling ourselves around the world. And actually, if we intend to address climate change, it's how we manage our cities that is the core to the issue of climate change. National leaders have been going to COP talks for nearly 30 years, and we probably feel a degree of frustration with where they've got to. It's because we need city leaders at the table, at the core of climate change discussion, and it's how we manage our cities that is the cutting edge, the bleeding edge of resilience. And that's why I put my title as the move from smart city, which is a belief in tech, to a focus on resilient cities. And that's what we see going on with city leaders all over. Cities cover just 3% of the Earth's surface, but 78% of the world's energy is consumed in cities. 60% of greenhouse gases made in cities. Vast majority of humanity will be living in a city in the second half of this century. Already half of people live in cities since 2012, but that will be going up to about 75-80% in the second half of the century as the population goes up to 9 or 10 billion. What it means is that the role of place leaders or city leaders, leaders of communities, shoots up the agenda of importance. So those of us on this conference today actually at the bleeding edge of what is going on in our cities and what is going on in our future. Indeed, not getting to grips with this as an agenda is to in fact miss the main thrust of what we will all see happening in this century. Let's go to the next slide. I've made these big statements, but my enthusiasm is backed up by the World Resources Foundation, which is the world's biggest think tank paid for by governments as to where is greenhouse gases coming from. And if you look at the energy in buildings and built infrastructure and transport, then you see that these are a third of all greenhouse gases coming from the things that city leaders and place leaders are responsible for. So we have a huge responsibility to think about our built environment and transport systems. Let's go to the next slide. At the Connected Places Catapult, what we've been doing about this is we've created test beds with some of the most intense places in cities. So we have a station innovation zone at Bristol Temple Meads. We have a connected airport living lab at Glasgow Airport. We have a maritime flagship innovation program at the Port of Tyne. And we have 6 test beds around the country for homes for healthy aging all over the country, looking at how to keep people living independently for longer in their own environments. And that's just the tip of the iceberg on over 100 different projects that we're running all the time on different types of decarbonisation, digitization of our futures. If you go to the next slide, I'm going to show you and close on this now, hopefully having set the scene and given you a very long perspective that what we do in the short term actually will have very profound long-term consequences. One of the things that we face as a challenge in Britain is that city leadership is divided by central government. We're forced to compete with each other for funding. It means that we find it sometimes hard to collaborate on big ideas. And the need for decarbonising our cities is indeed a very big idea. We did some research about the cost of how much would it cost to help local authorities hit their net zero targets, as every local authority in Britain has done, be it by 2030, 2035, 2040. We got to a sum somewhere between £500 billion and £1 trillion. A lot of money that isn't going to come from government. At the same time, the finance industry is proud to be stating its desire to fulfill ESG goals, environment, sustainability governance goals. So there's a lot of money in the finance industry. There's a lot of desire to make this be used at the city level. So we created something called the Cities Commission for Climate Investment, working with the core cities, the London councils, and that's where it began, and now involves every large city organisation in the country, from key cities, Scottish cities, London boroughs, and quite a lot of local government association, the metro mayors, and so on. And over the last nearly 2 years now, we've been bringing together a dialogue between the cities and the finance industry on how can we get finance flowing from big global finance into our cities in Britain. And we now have a pipeline of over 1,000 projects adding up to several billion that we're working through the business cases with. And I just want to close by showing you some of the momentum that's happening all around the country on this way of unlocking finance into this big challenge. Let's watch the video.
The market to provide private finance to local governments to decarbonise doesn't work. And because it doesn't work, we've got to reform it, we've got to reinvent it, we've got to activate it, we've got to stimulate it.
There is lots of money out there. We got the 1.4 trillion announced at COP last year, looking for places to land. But one of the blockages to it landing is, do individual cities offer the scale of investment that's needed for that money to be able to roll out?
The big risk is that if we stay in our sectors and our silos and our institutions, we do bits and pieces, but it doesn't add up to the transformation that we need.
Where do we need to invest the money to make the transition, and this wall of capital that wants to invest? We need to innovate the funding and implementation model in the middle to connect those two together.
You need more brains on this. And I think that's one of the key questions or gaps that 3CI is trying to fill, is how do we get the right people in the room?
I've never been involved in anything quite like this. The scale of a collaboration, cross-party, across the country with different partners. And every event I go to gets bigger. More and more people want to get involved, and more people around the country. So it does feel like a real wave of change that's happening through 3CI.
Sure, we're all accountable to our shareholders, but at the end of the day, I think the real value of this sort of exercise can only be magnified when you've got greater contribution from others.
We are going to spend tens of hundreds of billions of pounds on delivering this transition across the UK. We need to make sure that every pound we spend delivers multiple benefits for the environment, for our citizens, for addressing inequalities, for the futures of our children and young people, and for the planet. If we plan properly, I absolutely believe we can do that.
That's why I've been so committed to 3CI, because it's where you get to have that conversation together.
Come to us because we represent 95% of the UK local authorities. We have a pipeline that represents all of their projects. This is where you have that single conversation. This is where we're convening finance, industry, and local places together. This is where the action is.
Thank you very much, Geeta.
Thank you so much, Paul, for kicking off an incredibly inspiring talk there, which is, I'm sure, giving us all so much food for thought for the rest of the day. So we're going to move on now. We have our first leaders debate for the day, energy efficiency. The 2022 energy crisis combined with supply chain and geopolitical issues is putting increased pressure on council resources. Energy security is high on the political agenda, and councils are being asked to play a key role in tackling climate change. The decarbonisation agenda continues to pick up pace following the 6th UN Climate Change Conference. Government-owned buildings need to be more energy efficient in order to meet those decarbonisation targets. Now, there is assistance with funding from the Public Sector Decarbonisation Scheme and interest-free funding from Salix alongside other schemes. And they're all hoping to help achieve energy efficiency across all government property. So in this panel discussion, we'll hear from leaders on how the public sector can take vital steps towards improving energy efficiency in public buildings, and also gain insight into how leaders can transform energy performance. Let me introduce our panelists. We have Andrew Busby, who is Corporate Manager for Property, Leisure and Climate Change at Mid Devon District Council. Andrew has worked for Mid Devon District Council for over 17 years and is a dedicated corporate manager with a history of meeting council goals, utilising consistent and organised practices. We also have Tim Rippon, who is the Principal Advisor for Climate Change, Assistant Chief Executive Directorate at Newcastle upon Tyne City Council. Tim has been Project Director for Newcastle City Council's deployment of heat pumps and heat networks to approximately 32 non-domestic buildings across the city over the past year as part of a £27 million capital programme of energy efficiency and decarbonisation works. Giorgio Nalgiev is Head of Decarbonisation at Ofgem. He and the decarbonisation team in Ofgem develop analytical evidence and strategic advice for tackling some of the most pressing issues in decarbonising all sectors within Ofgem's remit in order to achieve net zero at the lowest cost for consumers. Last but not least, we have Paul Smith, who is Director of Strategy and Technical Services at Salix Finance. Paul leads Salix's energy and carbon team, working with the public sector to reduce carbon emissions through investment in energy efficiency and heat decarbonisation. Now, before we start the conversation, I just want to make sure you all are aware of the Ask Your Questions function today. Throughout the day, we do want to put your questions to our experts so that it's interactive and you get the most out of each session. So please do pop any questions you have as they are speaking. So can I invite all our speakers to the main stage? And I thought we'd start really with a question to you all, just to get a flavour of what your top priority has been when it comes to energy efficiency. Shall we start with you, Andrew, as I introduce you first?
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. First priority for carbon reduction has been to significantly reduce the baseline of CO2 emissions. That's been a driver. Like many other authorities, like yourselves, we have an aim of becoming net zero by 2030. So our first aim was to establish our baseline figure for carbon, and then to come up with methods of decarbonisation across our portfolio to reduce that baseline figure. Alongside that, we obviously need to be reducing cost wherever we possibly can. So where we can not only move away from fossil fuels, so the decarbonisation projects, for example, reduces the reliance on gas. We then move towards electricity, which is obviously a renewable source, but obviously at the same time we want to actually reduce the energy full stop what we're actually using. So we certainly took a holistic approach at our project at Exe Valley Leisure Centre in Tiverton and Lords Meadow Leisure Centre in Crediton, where we established where all the weak spots are regarding within the building envelope. Where is that air leakage? What is our baseline figure? Have we got anywhere we can really reduce? And then we applied our modelling and feasibility works onto ground source heat pumps as well as air source. So we've got both at Exe Valley Leisure Centre, which has turned out to be really successful. So we're about to be commissioned very shortly. So we're right up against the deadline of the end of March, but it's all looking really good at the moment.
Brilliant.
Hope that helps. Yeah,
no, excellent. And maybe I could bring you in, Tim, at this point, because we did mention about kind of the rollout of heat pumps that you have overseen as well. And I guess what your top priority has been.
Am I on mute?
I think we can hear you now. Yeah, brilliant. Got you.
I think I pressed mute rather than turn off. Good morning. Thank you, Geeta, and thank you, everyone. So our top priority has been carbon and cost, as I think a lot of people have been having a similar focus. I think the first thing we did, as a council, we operate about 800 buildings, and there is all manner of buildings in there, as you might imagine. So the first thing was to get it under the bonnet and figure out how do we do the kind of no cost or very low cost interventions? How do we adjust flow temperatures on the boilers? How do we make sure the BMS system is working effectively? How do we make sure we're not running it beyond the operational hours of the building? How do we make sure the set points at night are the right temperature? All of that is a really easy win energy efficiency things that give you carbon and cost savings from day one, and you can do without any grant intervention. So that was our first order of business, is really get our own house in order. Our second order of business was to try and figure out what we do about the rest of the energy balance in those buildings, and particularly the heat decarbonisation piece. So what we did in Public Sector Decarb Scheme PSDS 1, phase 1, is we took a really ambitious step forward. We went for 32 buildings with a capital value of 27 million, and we wanted to deploy funds into a really wide range of buildings, everything from our largest swimming pools in the city to our biggest academies, even buildings which have PFI contracts on them. We've sought to crack that nut and try and really figure our way through a complex mix of building types. I'll stop there if that's okay, Geeta.
Yeah, no, and we'll definitely be picking up on that. And as I mentioned at the start, any questions that come up as you're watching, please do put them in the Ask Your Questions box. Let me go over to you, Giorgio, because, you know, as head of decarbonisation at Ofgem, I'm sure there are many priorities for you, but I know that you recently launched a series of consultations into the future of local energy efficiency. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Morning, Ita. Thanks for that question, and morning, everyone. Yes, so what we recently launched is actually the Future of Local Energy Institution and Governments consultation, which, if I may take a step back, so when we think about energy efficiency, we generally think about comfort, how we can provide more better indoor environmental conditions for people and lower bills as well. But at Ofgem, what we tend to look at is how the whole energy system works. So how does an energy efficiency interplay with actually the networks that we have? And how can we optimize the planning approach? How can we work and how can we set up the system so that local councils have a voice in ensuring that their planning approaches are actually aligned with planning the network for the future? And as you know, Ofgem's main priority is protecting customers and providing lowest cost to the consumer. So on some practical notes, as part of our winter campaign, we actually launched an Energy Aware campaign where we provided effectively a central hub and advice for people on how they can optimize energy usage in their homes. So we're working both on the bottom-up layer, trying to directly communicate with consumers and also interact with stakeholders from across not only the country, but across different sectors as well, to try to understand how energy efficiency plays a role within the whole system optimization of our network planning, development, and our energy system as a whole.
Great, thank you. And Paul, let me bring you in because we heard a lot in our keynote about the important place that funding plays in all of this. And I just wondered, for you, what do you see as the opportunities and the priorities at the moment in order to help the sector flourish?
Sure, thank you, and good morning to all. Well, with Salix, we've been working with the public sector for almost 20 years now, and we have seen the work really evolve over these years. Initially, it was very, the low-cost measures, and also very straightforward insulation measures to reduce heating needs, heating demands. We've seen a tremendous level of effort and focus on electricity lighting measures, especially with LED really coming to the forefront. Certain types of clients had heavy electricity loads, such as data centers or labs, be it the big universities. So great opportunities there. But where it's really moved to in recent years now is how do we deal with the heat? We're really embracing that the electricity grid is getting much greener with all the success of the wind and the solar. And we're now looking at how can we move away from the fossil fuel intense heating systems. We're very dominated in the UK as a whole with gas heating, and we're doing a lot of work with the various PSDS schemes over recent years, trying to take some of the old heating systems that are fossil fuel based out of the equation and bring in brand new low carbon, no carbon heating systems, be it connections to district heating, the heat pumps that we referred to earlier, as you referenced, and also even biomass for the right site and the right occasion has an opportunity there as well.
Excellent, thank you. And there's so much that we could talk about, and we really want to look at solutions in our day-to-day, because I think a lot of the time the focus is on how difficult and what a scale of challenge we have before us. However, before we get to the solutions, it is useful, I guess, to share what the challenges have been and perhaps how you've overcome them. So, Andrew, you talked about some of the things that you've been doing. What would you say has been the greatest challenge and kind of how you're navigating that?
Yeah, thank you. So I would say the biggest challenge has been the procurement challenge and the tight timeframes. We had a year to turn this project around from start to finish, so it has been a tall order. Certainly lining up the governance from the outset for the authorities is really, really key. So obviously, once you get awarded the grant, that still has to be added through to the local authority's budget officially, which means council approval. So we lined that up in advance. But the procurement side and the supply chain, making sure we go through the appropriate frameworks, making sure the appropriate due diligence is in place, that was a real challenge, to be honest. So the suppliers that we secured in the end were really fantastic, but would we appreciated a bit more time? Yes, but we've done it. So, but certainly making sure from the offset that all your permissions and governance are lined up from the outset is definitely highly important, because it does become a problem further down the line.
Excellent, thank you. And same to you, Tim.
I think, Geeta, I could totally agree with where Andrew is at the moment. Certainly, we've shared that same those same kind of challenges. It's been a real pressure cooker environment actually delivering the PSDS programs, rightly or wrongly. I think actually it's put us through our paces and it's kept us sharp. But I do think, kind of looking forward, one of the key challenges we've got is how do we make schemes, decarbonisation projects, commercially viable or financially viable, with diminishing grant allocation for them. And that's something we're having to do a lot of work on, look at how we build commercial models or financial models that allow us to do that, allow us to achieve energy savings, achieve cost savings, and for that to pay for capital, pay for loans, low interest loans and whatnot. So that's been really interesting. But one of the key things, one of the key challenges there has been energy market volatility. We've all faced it. We all have seen some pretty unprecedented energy changes over the last few months and years. And I think that's really difficult to navigate your way through what future energy prices will look like and make investment decisions now, which will have payback periods over 10, 15, 20 years maybe. So that's a really difficult challenge for us at the moment.
Yeah, and maybe I could bring Paul in actually, given we're sort of talking about the finance element, and I guess that sort of tightrope that councils walk in terms of, well, all of us really, the markets are so volatile, how you make those investments.
Yes, I think in particular, building on getting the governance in place and getting ready to procure, we have seen some extreme pressures on the supply chains. We've seen inflation playing a big role. The time of applying versus the time of placing orders. Inflation really took an upward turn. There's also aspects such as getting heat pump ready, so the buildings will be able to move, say, a high temperature solution to a much lower, more suitable heat pump environment. And of course, comes with that is we are moving to an enhanced use of electricity. So are your sites ready to consume more electricity? Is the network and the substations or the electricity coming in suitably in place that the increased levels of electricity will not have any issues with your distribution network operator? But there's a whole concoction of pressures. The clients that we've been working with have been doing fantastic projects within very tough, harsh timescales. But some of the results that we're seeing and some of this move to low carbon heating in hundreds of buildings has been a real great success to share.
Thank you so much. And Giorgio, I know that last July, Ofgem released a Net Zero Britain paper, which shared Ofgem's view on key aspects of the UK's energy system that require significant reform. And I just wondered, from that paper, was there anything that stood out for you in relation to the public sector?
Yep, great question. Thanks for that. Yes, so particularly building on from the paper, actually, as we at Ofgem, our priority is always protecting consumers, and that's where most of our efforts have been in the last few months through this unparalleled time and challenges that we're all facing. And one of the key outputs of that paper, and what we're working on very hard now, is setting the institutional structure right so that local councils can actually have a system that allows them to work more closely with one of my colleagues on the panel mentioned distribution networks. And this is where I think energy efficiency plays also a key role. And other colleagues in the panel mentioned heat pumps, electrification. All of these challenges bring unprecedented transformation that I think we're all working towards. And what we're doing currently is trying to redesign the market that enables those who are able to be rewarded for moving their energy from times when it will be the cheapest, typically late at night, or renewables when they're producing through wind and sun. Also, of course, protecting our vulnerable consumers. So really, what we've learned throughout the process over the last couple of years is that we actually need fundamental change across our markets, and we're working very hard. And as you mentioned, we've published a few consultations that I actually welcome people engaging with, especially the one on local planning, because we really see a role for local driven planning to actually play a key part in investment processes in the future, because we want to understand what the requirements of councils are, what their ambitions are, and for example, local energy action plans. And this is where I think we will see a gradual transformation from all of us, including as consumers, being effectively static users of a pretty much static network in the past, to active participants, and in really a system transformational approach.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. And I've just noticed we've had a question come through. So thank you. We've got about sort of just under 10 minutes left. So any other questions, do send them in. This one is from Tim, and he says, there was a recent report about a company in Exmouth in Devon using heat from a computer data server to power a local swimming pool. And he says, is that something that can be rolled out nationwide? Andrew, I don't know if you're familiar with that, given it's sort of your part of the world.
Yes, down the road from Exmouth, well, the long road, but yes, it's down there in this neck of the woods, absolutely. Yeah, we've heard about this, obviously. I don't know too much about it. We're doing a lot of investigation work at the moment, but does it sound exciting? Yes, it does. It's a corker of an idea, if you ask me. So, yeah, we will certainly be exploring it, and hopefully we can share that nationwide, that idea. But yeah, absolutely, it could be rolled out if it's successful. So, really good stuff.
Is there anyone else on the panel who'd like to comment? Yeah, Tim.
Please, Gita. I think it's fantastic how much attention that particular project has gathered. I think it's come up in lots of conversation. It's really good to see that making that splash. But it's not the only place where that kind of system can be installed, or where you've got matching cooling loads to heating loads. There's a really good opportunity there to create an energy balance in buildings or between buildings. I mean, one of the ones we're looking at particularly at the moment is where we've got a shopping centre with a supermarket at one end of the shopping centre. So the supermarket has a very large cooling load, and the rest of the shopping centre has a very sizable heating load, and you can balance the two quite well. So you need to think about how we use energy very differently in these kind of localised environments, and I think this is just drawing a kind of attention to that issue.
Yeah, really kind of interesting way of kind of bigger thinking rather than just the set idea of how you do things. And right. Giorgio, you put your hand up. Is there something you'd like to say?
Yeah, and I would like to. I also think that's a great example, and this is where I would think that local councils would look to develop those sort of models into their local area energy plans and start to think about, what's the building stock that they have and how can they combine assets through different schemes. And I'm happy to put in the chat what I also, because I have an engineering background, another interesting example that that I recently read, an engineering one, is where a new build development actually got told by their local DNO that the grid is constrained. So what the engineers did is actually reduce the load estimate by 53% so that the scheme could be delivered, an all-electric scheme. And these are the sorts of collaborations where we see different sectors talking to each other, and I think this is where as well the future is going towards, is we will see more and more coordination between the networks that we have and the users of those networks, and really it's an exciting time to actually be alive and try to drive forward this positive change, especially considering the latest IPCC report.
Yeah, and just feeding into that, because there have been some comments in the chat. Chris has written, this is also the case in Redditch. The crematorium is supplying heat to the swimming pool next door. So this idea of different buildings, and sort of Mandy adds, what about capturing the heat from crematoriums? Is that something that more councils should be thinking about? Has anyone thought about that already on the panel?
We have actually, Geeta. We've been we're currently in a design stage, design stage 3 for a crematorium system. We're looking at two things there. We're looking at one, how do we capture excess heat from the existing gas cremators? But we're also looking at how do we shift the gas cremators away from gas and put them into electric cremation. And there's some really interesting energy savings that can be achieved from electric cremators. It's not something I ever thought I'd know very much about, but I'm learning, and it's certainly fascinating. So really good to see if you've got a crematorium located near a big heat demand customer, there is a natural synergy there. There is a bit of a sensitivity there. People often, sort of cultural issues or religious issues mean that there is some sensitivity there that needs to be managed.
Of course, and that's why sort of every single building that you look at, you have to be sensitive to how it's being used and the people who use that particular space. I've got lots of questions coming in now, so we're really happy with this. So I'll try and squeeze in as many as I can. Anne-Marie is asking the panel, what's your view on whether many local authorities have ring-fence funds to help contribute towards carbon zero targets and support using funds such as Salix? What argument has been put forward to press for this? So this idea of sort of ring-fence funds. I mean, what do you think, Paul, from a kind of Salix perspective?
The original model that Salix worked with clients on was a ring-fence fund. So it was a great way of having a budget in place, so there wasn't this pressure at various times of the year to use it or lose it. There's a whole positivity of being able to properly resource against such a budget. So if councils have the opportunity, and we appreciate all the strains and pressures and challenges, to put a long-term budget in place, then it's a great way to set up a sustainable plan.
Great, thank you. And actually on the topic, staying with funding, I've also had a question come in, or kind of a thought really, that the cost of local area energy plans often prevents these for many councils. Can these be funded? Would anyone like to answer that?
I think there is some funding out there for local area energy plans, particularly through, for instance, where you've got local authorities with a combined authority. Sometimes the combined authorities have funds for this kind of bigger strategic thinking. So there are small pots of funding around. I think a local area energy plan at the moment can mean different things to different people, and it needs to be tailored to the specific needs of a local authority or a local area or even a region to have most impact and to be most beneficial. And there are different scales of local area energy planning you can do. You can do a sort of kind of top-down approach where you start with the big grid impacts, the national gas grid, but also the national electricity grid, and work your way down to the end consumer. The alternative is you start more at community scale or neighbourhood scale and you build up. Both of them have different resource requirements, different cost requirements, and you can match the local area energy planning that you undertake to your budget, I think.
And Giorgio, yeah.
Just really quickly, so that's obviously a question that I would defer to my government colleagues, but I just wanted to point out that the Energy Systems Catapult have actually issued guidance on creating a local area energy plan. So that's, I think, a helpful resource that hopefully people are aware of, that they can utilize already.
Brilliant, thank you. And just going back to the conversation we're having around heat generation and sort of using different aspects of stock in your area. Someone, it's Catherine actually, asked any examples of using the canal network for heat generation. Don't suppose, Andrew, are you nodding there, or is that more of a kind of...
No, not as a good idea. Yeah, we have Grand Western Canal in Tiverton. I was just thinking, oh yeah, that's a good idea. So yeah, hydroelectricity, obviously, is we've thought about, but yeah, gathering heat demand from canals is a really good point.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, we've not got a lot of time left, so I just thought maybe we could wrap up very briefly. It's a kind of like 20-second answer, if that's possible. But what you see as, I guess, a success, you know, a real kind of filling us with that sense of positivity as we end the chat in your terms of what you're doing. Tim, I know you've done a lot, but if there was one thing to pull out.
Gosh, that's a hard question to answer. I think there's an awful lot of positives to take from this. There's a lot of attention on these issues. There's a lot of momentum behind these schemes. I think it's fantastic. I think we just got to keep that momentum going and keep the pressure on to get to net zero as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, basically just actually taking the opportunities which Salix are putting out there for us. You know, it's fantastic, and making sure that councils continue to put in their bids, work out their bids in advance, and get and secure significant funds for delivering carbon reduction.
Brilliant. And Giorgio?
I'll make it short and sweet. It's a personal one, actually, for me. I'm really proud of the Energy Aware campaign that we launched in winter. And actually, yesterday I was at an exposition, and I talked to consumers who, throughout our campaign, were actually able to find funds to improve their homes. And I'm really pleased to actually see consumers starting to engage, not only from a net zero perspective, but people starting to understand and engage with energy efficiency in their homes a lot more. And I think we should keep on that momentum across the board because we really need to have a lot more action on that front.
Thank you so much. We're really running out of time, but Paul, for you, what would be something to take away?
I think you've just got to embrace all the projects that are being done and just share and learn from the experience. That's a great platform to build from.
Thank you so much. I think we could have talked for a lot longer. Thank you to our brilliant first panelists. We'll take a quick break now, time to digest what's been covered, and we will be back at 10:40, so not long to go. So we'll see you shortly. Thank you. Bye.